It's like asking James Earl Jones to be one of the Lollipop Kids. I mean, it doesn't work, man.
You're listening to PaleoCheeze Podcast, Episode 2, Paddleton and the Ever-Elusive Platonic Bromance.
Hello, dear listener. I'm Chad Lutsky.
And I'm Jeremiah Bannister.
And you're listening to the PaleoCheeze Podcast, where we toss a film onto the Cheese Lounge to discuss, psychoanalyze, and maybe even point and laugh at it.
Mm-hmm.
And today, we're talking about Paddleton, a Mark Duplass film.
It's actually not going to be a lot of laughing, I don't think, in that.
No.
This is one of those where it's not a whole bunch of like poking fun and pointing fingers and going, ha, 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 you have cancer. Like,
certainly not. But we should get some laughing and some just hanging out, talking about what we're watching, what we're reading, maybe even what we're listening to. So over the past week or two or whatever, what have you been reading and or watching?
Oh, dude. I love classical literature. I think I mentioned that in the last episode that I enjoy reading stuff about mythology and things like that. But I have been reading the Oresteia. It's this 3-part series, this trilogy by Aeschylus. And by the way, I did not know how to pronounce that guy's name. I think I was saying Aeschylus or something. I forget. And I remember saying it before and thinking I sounded pretty dope, like I really knew what I was talking about. Oh no, it's Aeschylus. At least I'm hoping so. I hope I'm not saying it now and people go, actually, sir. Yeah. I went to Merriam-Webster, man. It says it on there. But no, the Oresteia, it's got Agamemnon, the libation bearers, the Eumenides, and it's totally awesome. The whole thing is awesome. I love it. It's this terrible, terrible tragedy, but it's translated by a guy named Robert Fagles, and Fagles writes the intro called The Serpent and the Eagle. And man, I'll tell you, it is amazing. Like this guy, I went online trying to find more about this guy and saying, I want to read his stuff. Like I want to read what he says, because his analysis of it was gorgeous. The writing, the prose of it all was just absolutely amazing. And so I've been reading that and absolutely loving it. I'll probably do a review sometime just on the book itself. But then also, I picked up this book, man, a while ago. We have some really cool used bookstores in Grand Rapids, and I don't know if I was at Redux or where I was, man, but there is a book there, The Complete Short Stories of Ernest Hemingway. And truth be told, man, I think, I read little tidbits here and there of Hemingway in school, but then nothing after that. So to go back and say, well, I want to go ahead and I'm going to read a little bit, and read Snows of Kilimanjaro for the first time in my life. Blew my mind, bro. Totally blew my mind. Oh yeah. I mean, it was like laser blast level stuff. And so it was amazing. And then he wrote one, it's pretty dark, called Up in Michigan. And I even read an analysis of Up in Michigan that was amazing. And so I'm really grateful, in fact, not just to be reading the books that I'm reading, but even to stumble on things that I wasn't familiar with.
I have a bunch of Hemingway, but I've only read The Old Man and the Sea, and it wasn't for school. We never read that for school, but I read it on my own. I don't know, maybe a decade ago. It was okay. I mean, it wasn't horrible, but it wasn't anything that I was like, oh man, you have to read this. Have you read that one, The Old Man and the Sea?
Not yet. I plan to read a significant number of them, and I forget which one I read that I wasn't that impressed with. I mean, he has a huge array of different writings. And so even writers that I especially like Hilary Belloc, I really love Hilary Belloc as a writer. And yet there's things that, he published that by comparison, it's kind of garbage, I think, to use the French word for that. And so it's not very good. And so even with Hemingway, I can assume that there's a lot of that. Although I'd be interested to read in the intro to this, they have him talking about his own work. And there's some of the stories that he particularly liked, and he admits that some of the ones that he really liked were ones that did not have any critical acclaim. The people didn't care for it, bashed it. It didn't get a lot of circulation, didn't make him a lot of money, but they were near and dear to his heart. So I want to read those too.
That's cool. I've had this book by Josh Malerman for a while that I haven't ever read yet. It's a thin book, published by This Is Horror, which actually does a wonderful podcast. But they also, I'm not sure how many books they publish, but this was one of them, and you can't get it anymore from them. It's out of print, at least through them. I'm only about a third of the way through, but it's really good. I like it a lot. I don't know if I like it as much as Bird Box, but it's still really, I mean, it's just a completely different story, and it's coming of age. A girl and a boy are on a first date in a canoe where they go to a lake, and then that lake goes into another lake that's not so crowded, but then they find a third lake where they have to go through a tunnel. And once they reach that, it's kind of, it's like a whole other, unexplored world, at least for them. And while they're there, they see a house in the water, fully furnished down there. And they want to start exploring it. It's pretty endearing. It's also very claustrophobic. I'm not sure how scary it's going to get, but I'm really enjoying it. It's really good. Another book that I'm reading is by an author named Ronald Kelly. He's just started writing again, I believe, maybe 9 years ago, 11 years ago, something like that. But he had taken a hiatus. He was a fairly popular horror author in the 90s. And I think he wrote a handful of stuff, and some of it's hard to get. You can get it on eBay, but he actually went on hiatus. I talked to him about this the other day, and I think I can speak about it publicly because I've read it on his Wikipedia page. But he went on a hiatus for a couple of different reasons, but I thought it was interesting that one of the reasons why was because he had felt a religious conviction on what he was writing. So he quit for 10 years. That's not all of the reason, but that's one of the reasons.
Right.
And so we talked about it. And I've become, I guess, friends with Ronald over the past year. He's read some of my stuff, and one of the reasons why I'm reading this, the book isn't out yet. It's going to be published by Silver Shamrock, I believe, and it's called The Essential Six Stuff, and it's a collection of short stories, some of which have already been published, and some newer stuff. But he asked me for a blurb. I get asked that quite often. I can't always do it. So I'm hoping to be able to give him a nice blurb that he can toss on the cover or whatever. So far, I think I've read 2.5, 3 stories. Yeah, he can write, man. Actually, disturbing stuff in there. And it's, I wouldn't say shocked, but you never know what you're going to get when you read something, especially if it's a friend or an acquaintance and they're like, hey, can you read this? And sometimes it's just not it's not that great. And so, but I am enjoying this.
And I wasn't anticipating saying this, but you brought up the idea of friends asking about it. And I have a friend who asked me, he really likes my writing, and he asked me if I would edit his book. And it's one of those fortunate situations because I anticipated that it would be a good read, but I was also relieved, right? And there's always that kind of thing in the back of the mind that goes, dude, please tell me this is going to be a good book. And so it's fortunately really good. It doesn't require a lot of my artistry to help him with that, but I understand, man. I'm coming to appreciate what you're talking about. I'm not quite at the Lutsky level, but I'm getting there, man. I'm serious. When I grow up, dude, I want to be like that. I've been watching movies too. And that's one thing, I watched, while I'm editing or whatever, I'll have movies play in the background. I mean, not so much movies anymore because I try to write notes for those, but have cartoons. I mentioned, I think last episode I was talking about Super Friends and Ren and Stimpy, but it's moved on now. Okay. Now it's still there, right? The Super Friends is still there, of course, but the thing playing in the background now is X-Men. And I'm a collector. So I've collected a lot of comics, man, for a long time. My parents, for my birthday, gave me a subscription to Spider-Man. I had the original Carnage story. So I had that. I have a 30-year anniversary edition with this hologram cover that's really cool for Spider-Man. But I was also into X-Men, and I've got a lot of stuff with Wolverine. I liked artists like Sam Keith, who also is of the Max fame. But I've also watched a movie. I watched one called Snowpiercer. It's directed by Bong Joon-ho. The director, he also did Parasite, which is on my watch list. I want to see that movie. And he did the host. Yeah, he did the host too. It's based on a graphic novel, a French graphic novel by Jacques Loeb and Jean-Marc Rochet, and it has in there stars Christopher Robert Evans, and I gotta give it up to old Chris Evans, because when you have any movie like this where you've got this star, somebody who's really made a name for himself, and his face is on these blockbuster hits and stuff, it's really difficult to kind of peel away from that, because people will inevitably just see you as that character.
Sure.
So I was really glad to see him in this character, and not constantly to be thinking of him in his highlight role in not another teen movie. But the idea, no, it's he's Captain America, and he was on Fantastic Four, and so the idea that I was able to see beyond that, to see beyond the popular roles that he's played over time, it really says something about him. I think that he's an amazing actor. So it was a cool movie. Yeah.
I just watched I've been watching Curb Your Enthusiasm, and I've already seen all of them except for I think the last season and a half. I think there's 10 seasons now. Yeah, it's one of my favorite shows for sure. And I mean, watching it, you can tell it's very Seinfeldish. So you can tell Larry David was a big part in writing, creating Seinfeld. But I love not only the show, but I love the way that they film the show and write the show, which is ironic that I'm even bringing this up, because it's because we're going to be talking about Paddleton, and which is a movie that is, for the most part, is improvised. So like with Curb Your Enthusiasm, they have an outline, and they have certain things that's like, okay, now here's like, you need to get pissed and tell me, and get mad at me about this thing, and they have a structure to it, obviously, because everything, just like oftentimes in Seinfeld, everything kind of comes to a head at the end, and things kind of like intertwine and stuff, especially in Curb. There's a lot of like foreshadowing, and you can tell that, okay, this is going to pop up at the end, and Larry's going to get in so much trouble for this or whatever. But the dialogue is all improvised. Once in a while, they do have something that's important. It's a line that needs to be said for sure. And I just find that fascinating. And, we'll get into it a little bit later, but Mark Duplass, who has written several movies and starred in them, that's his shtick. That's what he does. That's what he's most comfortable with. And so when he's directing a film or working on one, that's what he wants his actors to do, is to improvise their stuff. So, but we'll get into that when
right
I guess
now.
Could be right now.
It's right now. There's what's holding us back, man.
I think we should do this.
Let's do this.
Okay, so Paddleton. It's I guess you could call it a dramedy, but more heavier on the drama side than any kind of comedy. But there's definitely some laugh out loud moments in there for sure. But the content is dark. It was written by Mark Duplass and Alex Lehman. And Alex also directed Blue Jay, which was written and starred Mark Duplass. Kind of romantic, black and white, very indie film. Paddleton is it's a dramedy, and it stars Mark Duplass and Ray Romano, which, if you've only seen him in what was the name of his show?
Everybody Loves Raymond.
Yeah. If you've only seen him in that and tend to stay away from anything else you might be in, you're doing yourself
a disservice.
He was great in Parenthood. He was great in this film. I know he's in a new Martin Scorsese film, The Irishman. And yes, his voice does lend to being cursed with seemingly playing the same type of character, just kind of like that cartoon character Droopy. Remember that?
Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. He's kind of a downer.
It was inevitable.
Yeah.
It would be really tough for him to be the pizzazzy guy.
Yeah.
It's like asking James Earl Jones to be one of the Lollipop Kids. I mean, it doesn't work, man.
Yeah.
But this one was yours.
Yeah. I was just going to say that I saw it at the very beginning of the year. In January, I watched it, and I was excited because I'm a huge Mark Duplass fan, and his brother Jay. They work together all of the time. They're inseparable. I know a lot about these guys. I've seen many conferences, interviews, all kinds of stuff. I've read interviews, watched interviews. So I know a lot about these guys and where they came from, how they got where they are, and their ideas on making films. And it's very DIY. It's very punk rock. So I was excited about seeing this movie. I knew it was going to be right up my alley. I'm a huge fan of character-driven, heavy dialogue-driven films. The type that some people would sit down with me and probably go, my gosh, this is so boring. But I love them. Yeah, when I saw it, I knew I don't think that there's going to be a movie that's going to be able to top this one this year for me. And the year just started, so we'll see. But when we started talking about doing the podcast, it was one of the first ones.
You were insistent.
I said, yeah, I was.
Yeah. But then you thought about something, you were so excited about it because the experience you had that it kind of didn't process all the way. And you were really generous. And you're my friend, man, right? We're not just doing this as, two guys coming together. We're friends. We go back a long way. And you said, I got to tell you, this has to do with somebody who's got cancer, because my daughter died, my firstborn, Samantha, she died of brain cancer. And so it's been almost 3 years since she died. But I told you, I said, look, it's been long enough. And these are stories that really resonate with me. Obviously, I anticipated crying, and I did. And I may even tear up a little bit talking about it. So I know that listeners will forgive me on that, but kind of put the cards on the table here, right? Maybe even a little early, but just to say that at the end, I was so glad that I watched this. Yeah. Man, it's like a monster calls, I am so glad. That was another really painful one to watch, but it was one of those where it was painful. But at the same time, it's like, man, dude, I am so happy that I went through that. And so interestingly enough, maybe even kind of plays into the theme of the movie.
For those who don't know, without giving any spoilers, because a lot of people haven't seen it yet. It hasn't been out that long. Paddleton is the relationship between the two characters, Michael and Andy, Ray Romano and Mark Duplass, and they have kind of a very platonic bromance where they're middle-aged guys who really kind of find that they need each other. And one of them has been diagnosed with cancer, and he's not going to make it. That much has been told to him. So he decides that he's going to go on a road trip with his buddy to go get this drug that you can take to basically euthanize yourself, so that you don't have to go through all of the ugliness that can be involved with having something like that. So that's pretty much what the movie is about. We talked about Wild at Heart in the last episode, and that movie began with a bang, right? A lot of them. And so right from the get-go, you're right into it. And it's the same with this. Right from the get-go, they are in a doctor's office, and they are being told that he has cancer. Well, he's not told necessarily he has cancer. He's told that there are growths. But this really, really concerns Andy, the character played by Romano, that it's extremely concerning to him. And it says a lot. I think the character development actually happens pretty quickly in this film. But right away, you get to know so much about their relationship and both of their temperaments and the way that they're dealing with this. You get so much of it very quickly, and you get him in weird, right in the beginning, that Ray really cares about Mark's character, that they really, he wants to know exactly what's going on, what the options are, and how can he live through this, and tell me now. And there's not even a diagnosis. And the guy who's dying, he's just like, chill, it's going to be cool. And the other guy's like, no. So right away, it does a great job of very soon establishing who's who, and what kind of role they're playing, like, in their relationship. And that the idea of uncertainty and how both of them are in the face of that, not entirely, because it kind of, some things change over time, right? Just like people. But in the beginning, as it stands, you got Ray Romano. I mean, he's just freaking out. And he's trying any way that he can to figure out with this nurse, right, or this doctor, to say, like, if I frame it as a question or as an answer, like,
he's doing this kind of Jeopardy thing with her, and maybe you can answer me. And she's confused by it. And Michael, Mark Duplass's character, sitting there just kind of like, he's just taking it in stride, though. Like, he knows that this is all about brotherly love. This is all about his best friend really being concerned for him and afraid for this predicament. But I thought that was really cool, and a lot of props, man, to both of them and to the writers on that for the ability to develop those characters so quickly in a really powerful way too.
Going back to what I was talking about with the improvising of everything, I watched a lot of interviews with Romano and Duplass, specifically about this movie. And Ray, I don't believe, had ever worked like this before, like off the cuff, just the dialogue. Just he would go home and think of jokes to say, because there are several jokes, especially from his character, several funny scenes, but it's very dry humor too, and he would come up with that the night before, whatever, and then show up to film the particular scene, and he would spout off or whatever. It was challenging for him, and he's also stated that it's probably the most fun he's ever had filming a movie ever. It was cool to hear the story about how Mark had gotten him to do this and how he thought he would be perfect for it. But what I found most interesting was Mark's idea of the world not having enough movies like this, where they explore not necessarily like a taboo platonic male relationship, not being that it's taboo, but that there just isn't enough of them. Men who have a relationship like that tend to,
live in monasteries.
Well, they kind of like, their love is unspoken, kind of, like these guys, they loved each other. It was very clear because they were spending all of their time with each
every
other.
Day.
They didn't have wives or girlfriends or any like family coming around or anything. And so they were the best of friends. And Duplass wanted to really explore that because he, there isn't enough movies out there like that. And I like those kind of movies because it's something that, I personally, and I know you are too, we kind of wear that on our sleeve. I have no problem, saying to a guy, "Hey, I love you." I mean, we do it all the time.
Right. Yeah.
And, or hugging or anything like that. I'm completely comfortable with that. Some people aren't, and I just like the idea of him exploring that and doing it very, tastefully and memorable and in a very profound manner.
There's a review over at Mashable, Allison Foreman, and it's called Netflix's Paddleton shows how desperately we need the words to describe our more than friendships. And there's a quote that's really applicable here. Said, "I can't say a suitable term for this relationship comes easily to mind, but I've never seen a better example of it on screen. So for now, and in spite of it truly being a terrible title, I guess we'll just have to call it and them a Paddleton. After all, we have to call them something." And I disagree with the idea that that's a terrible name for a movie. I think it's a cool name for a movie. But the thrust of what she's saying is totally true, that we live in a society where it's easy to envision and to describe and to talk about relationships that are men and women, or even with women and women or men and men, but not where it's like this, right? Normally it'd be, well, it's bros getting together and they go to their, go back home to their wives or whatever. But these guys are alone. And they live in apartments, one above the other. And in fact, it's the kind of friendships that and I liked how in the movie that they brought this up, was that people will perceive them as gay, but that they're not. And in fact, that they kind of look at the whole thing like in a very almost naive way, that why would it even appear that way? Like, no, like the idea that even looks this way at all. And I think it takes a real weirdo to try to argue that it's a repressed thing in this movie. I think that would take a real stretch. I think that this is a matter that is genuine, just true friendship. This is the way that they live, and that they like weird things. They like watching kung fu movies, right? And not just that they like doing weird things, but the weird things every day. to go to their job, and when they get home to watch some crazy old kung fu movie, right, and to eat some pizza together, and to play some games like puzzles and stuff. That these are that's their routine, and to play Paddleton, this game. And by the way, we should just describe this game, because there is no other instance of this that I know of. And I don't know if they based it off of like a real thing that the writers did when they were kids or what, but it's kind of a cool, it seems like it would actually be kind of a fun game, actually.
Yeah, something that they made up. And before I forget, when I saw this movie and I posted on Facebook that I'd watched it, I believe my status said something like, just watched Paddleton and it tore me up, or something like that. And there were quite a few people who were confused at why the movie about the teddy bear would have me crying so hard. I had to explain that, no, man, it's not Paddington.
Yeah, it's Paddleton. Exactly. Yeah. The idea is it's this game where, and they play it, they go to this very old and abandoned drive-in movie theater, and it's the Valley Drive-In. And I think that they chose that word Valley, and it's in huge words, right? I mean, huge letters. I think that it's playing on the idea, and this is my personal take, that it's about the shadow of death. Even New York Times had a review of this, of the movie, that was shrugging at the shadow of death. And so I'm not the only person who kind of got the idea that they're playing this game in the Valley of Death, right? But they have these tennis rackets, and they have this pink ball, and the goal is, it seems like it's a collective effort, that they're not against each other at all. And the idea is to try to get it to bounce off of the wall and then onto the ground, and then bounce into one of those a burning barrel. And when it happens, they're pumped. I mean, they're jumping around, and they're ecstatic. Yeah. So people would be kind of weirded out that it's not even seemingly competitive.
Right.
Yeah. I guess the competition is the barrel, that's the bad guy, and they have a particular movie, man, that they know like by heart.
The director who co-wrote it with Duplass, he was begging Mark to let him film a fake kung fu movie that doesn't exist. And Mark was like, I don't think you're going to be able to pull it off. It's really got to be authentic. He's like, well, just let me try. And the dude did it. And I was convinced that was a legitimate kung fu movie.
I thought it was a real one. I'm learning this for the first time right now.
Yeah, it's not. The director, the director made that, and then they used it.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
it has that vintage feel. You got to wonder what kind of cameras they use. Like, I would love to talk to them and ask, like, what kind of cameras were you using to produce that effect? And
some of it could have been done in, I mean, I'm sure cameras had to do with it, but also, post-production with the, graininess and things like that. And of course they had the bad dubs in it, but just because you take you put bad dubs doesn't mean it's going to look authentic. This legitimately did look really, I think that when me and my wife were watching it, I think I even made a remark that that's a legit movie. That's a real kung fu movie, and I was totally wrong.
But that's the life they live, and so to have cancer thrown into that really messes things up, and it's really tough because on the one hand, Andy really struggles to keep living as if everything is normal, but yet Michael wants to live as normal as possible because he loves life and he loves his friend. It's bad enough that he's got cancer, but it'd be even worse if he just couldn't enjoy himself and to enjoy the things that may not be the greatest things in the world. Like, there's a really cool scene where they're watching the movie and they're cooking this pizza, and for whatever reason, it ends up being on too long and it's burnt. And Andy, Romano's character, is totally not cool with this. He's freaking out. He's really upset, insisting that we can't eat that. We can't do that. And Duplass's character, Michael, totally thinks that it's fine. And he keeps insisting it's okay. Mm-hmm. It's all right. And it's not bad. And the way that they're going about this, that one is willing to just accept the one with cancer. Okay. Because it ends up being diagnosed. I mean, it's cancer, right? And it's not just cancer. It is inoperable. And there's no tests. There's no, anything. There's some meds that they can take, but it's not to be curative. There's nothing like that. So you're just from the beginning, you're accepting the fate of this. You know that is the end of the tunnel for this. And yet here he is looking at burnt pizza, and he's okay with it. And he's the one with cancer. And that kind of stuff happens, man, for real. Like, you know, and that happens numerous times where, you know, Romano's trying to make it totally perfect. He's trying to make sure that everything's taken care of, and it's a control matter, you know, that he wants to be in control, which is symbolic in the idea that later on he purchases a safe.
Which I love that. It was very endearing. I love the fact that it was a toy, you know,
Yes.
It was like a pink girl's toy that he just picked up from the, you know, local store or pharmacy or whatever to use. I really like that a lot.
And I like the idea that there were legitimate fights over this. And this is why it's more nuanced, right? And I like the nuance of these characters, because Andy, Romano's character, is freakish about control from the very beginning. He's the one who wants to know the answers. He wants to, any way he can possibly get it. Everything needs to be just right all the time. And Michael is the one that is accepting the way that things are. But when it comes to the medicine, just to have it near him, he has to have that. And Andy buys that toy safe and buys it pays a pharmacist. That was actually a pretty endearing scene where when the pharmacist is giving Michael the medicine, he's very, very uncomfortable describing how to take this medicine, right? Because you're dying. It's going to kill you. And so he's very uncomfortable. It's very unsettling. You can tell he's uneasy about the whole thing. Yes. But when they have this safe, all of a sudden, Michael is in desperate need of control too. You know, and they get in this fight over the safe, and they're yelling at each other, running around this table. Yeah. And they're running around, and he says, you know, well, why do you need it? You know, Andy says, why do you need it? And he says, because it's mine. I bought these meds. It's mine. And he says, well, but why do you need it? And he says, because I'm the dying guy. Yeah. And he keeps repeating it over and over. And then eventually he snaps because he's hearing it over and over. I'm the dying guy. I'm the dying guy. And he snaps and he goes, and I'm the other guy. Yeah. That's heavy. That's the heart of both.
Yeah, it was heavy. And you know, yeah, I'm the other guy. I am the one who's going to be left behind. I'm going to be alone. Because you're all I have. Yeah.
There's a truth to that, you know, and the idea that on the one hand, you know, we all know people who've died, and everybody listening knows somebody who's died, and maybe even somebody close to them. But, you know, on the one hand, yes, it is super painful that they're dying. It is worse than not dying, obviously, and you are in the better place. At the same time, you are going to continue on. And that's tough. Yeah. That's a hard deal. In fact, it was one of the most haunting things of my whole life was that very question. How do you continue to survive? And I remember when I asked it, it was, I have a good friend and her son committed suicide years ago. They came home and found him. He had a rosary and a Bible out, and he was dead on the ground. Took a lot of meds. Quite obviously, regret in his mind and in his heart. And it was extremely painful. And I was at the funeral in this church, this Catholic church. We're Catholic. And I remember the casket coming in, and they open up the doors. I'm in the narthex in the back, and they open up these double doors, and they swing wide open. And right there, man, you can see way off in the distance, you can see the altar, and you can see the priest wearing his black and his violet. And then there's the mom. And the mom, little Italian lady, man, black dress, black veil. And her eyes just light up, and she's standing in the aisle, right? And she comes running toward the casket as fast as she can. And she jumps on it and she cries out, my boy, my beautiful boy. And dude, it was so gut wrenching to watch this. I was bawling my brains out. And I thought to myself, how do you continue on as a parent? Like, and I said, I couldn't even imagine what that'd be like. It was the worst nightmare in the world.
Right.
But then it happened. And I had to deal with that too. And so it is a terrible truth that everything inside of you is programmed in such a way for survival at almost any and all cost, and with rare exception, and normally under extreme duress, where people take their own lives. But in general, you don't want to die. And I remember thinking with this movie how hard it would be for Romano's character, because unlike me and unlike people I know, Romano didn't have anybody else.
Spoiler alert here. So if anybody wants to, fast forward a little bit, but it's hard not to talk about the end of this movie. I mean, that's not just the best part. That the whole thing is good. It's just the whole ride getting there. But that drive that you're talking about really hits Duplass's character, and he changes. Like you were mentioning, he changes from being, this is going to be all right. It is what it is. This is just, you got to deal with it, to being absolutely terrified. That's the part that got me the most. To see him being broken like that just destroyed me, man. It was probably the second most kind of moving thing that I'd ever seen. The first being the season finale of 6 Feet Under, but I wasn't expecting that, man. I really it just really took me by surprise, and just the realism of the movie anyway, where it's almost like watching some kind of really well-made found footage film, because everything was just so organic and natural and real. And so when that happened, it felt like such a real reaction. Yeah, it just felt very genuine.
So much of it, man. So much of it. In fact, my wife, she was able to watch A Monster Calls. In fact, she liked that. But we also cried like 6 times in the movie, right? It's one of those things where it's like, well, we're in it together, sweetheart. It's the way it is. But this movie, I remember she got through maybe 5 minutes, that opening scene talking about cancer. And she got up and went and was washing dishes. Right? She never does that, just never. And so I knew I wasn't going to press it at all. Would be absurd for me to do. But we talked about it the next day, and she was saying that one of the things that she didn't like about it, and what I would dare to say was the difference between that and watching a movie like A Monster Calls, is that it's quite obvious that in Monster Calls, you got this huge monster, right? There's a huge tree monster. The yew tree grows into this big thing, Liam Neeson's voice, so it's amazing sounding. He's a sexy monster. And so you don't get that very often. And so this was not that. In fact, the way Chad describes it is great, where it's so real that you're watching it, and the way that the filming was done, the way that the characters talk and act and everything's kind of played out, it feels real. Like you're watching, you're peeking into somebody's life. And it was that suspended disbelief, because we know we're watching Ray Romano, right? We know that. We know we're watching Mark Duplass, and yet at the same time, for that time, man, we don't. Like it was that suspended disbelief where you're really into it because it feels so organic and true to life, what you're experiencing. And even like there were so many things in the buildup. They have this pretty interesting scene, which critics have complained about, and I think is essential, but I won't talk too much about here, I guess, but is where they're at a bar. They're drinking together and they're telling the story of Death Punch together, right? And it's a pretty powerful moment. It kind of really tells you a lot about them together and what they are without each other too. Afterward, they go into this hot tub and they take off their swim trunks. They're naked in this hot tub and they're sitting there kind of thinking they're being a little rebellious, a little bit tipsy. A woman comes and she's the one that owns the place. She manages the hotel. And she sits in there and she's talking to them. Come to find out, her husband had died, and there was she used a phrase that her husband is here, and they said, "Oh, he's here," and she said, "Yeah, he's everywhere." And they said, "Oh, like what do you mean by everywhere?" And she goes, "Well, he died." And it's kind of matter of factly, but you can tell. In fact, I wish I knew that woman's name because I felt like she did an amazing job acting. She was amazing, actually. But then Duplass's character leaves, and he gets up, and she tells Romano's character, "You stay," right? And she goes up to talk to him, and she's kind of flirting with him and taking off his glasses and trying to get kind of sexy with him, even looks into the hot tub and says, "Well, that's cute," kind of thing. And it's the only real sexual thing in the whole film. All right. That's the other thing about it. It's a very clean film in that regard. And so she kind of gets up on him and he says, "What about your husband?" And she goes, "Well, he's always with me, but he's also gone."
Mm-hmm.
And Romano, in that moment, he pulls down his hat. He's wearing one of those knitted caps, and he pulls it over his eyes and he turns his face very slowly away from her.
Mm-hmm.
And dude, I cried with him because I sat there and I said, that's tragedy, because what she said is so true. And that's the heart of the pain for him, is that his friend will always be with him and those memories will always be with him. But the truth is that his friend will also be gone.
Yeah.
And you could hear the reservation to that truth come out of her in a very heartfelt way, that on the one hand, it was obvious that she loves her husband still and that she misses him profoundly.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, that she is moving on in life and even caving to appetites, right?
Mm-hmm.
And her needs as a woman, because he is gone. I gotta say this, man, because it's something that it's like it was a sequence there where I cried a couple times real quick in a row, because there was one scene where he goes back and he's looking at his buddy drunk. It was right after that scene. He creeps back into the room and he looks over and he sees his buddy on the bed and he can't hear him breathing, and his face looks, his jaw's dropped open. He's kind of looking a little bit dead, a little, not looking too hot. And he's saying, Michael, Michael, Michael. And he's saying it over and over and over. And man, my heart started pounding. And he goes over and he's shaking him, kind of thing. And Michael gets up, and hey, whoa, what's going on? He's super duper drunk. And I thought about that. And I said, I had an experience like that with my daughter, man, at a camp. And we're there, and she was super tired. It was about a week and a half before she died. And I go into this cabin because she was super tired. She had brain cancer, so she's super exhausted. And she was sleeping a lot at that time, like maybe 20 hours a day. And I go out, man, and it's dark out there. And so I curl up, I get on her bed, and I said, "Hey, Samantha." And she doesn't answer. I did it over and over and over, and I'm getting scared, man. And my heart was racing. And I grabbed her, and I'm not gonna lie, man, I smacked her. I'm not even lying. Don't even take this out. This is for real. I said this at the funeral, man. I smacked her in the face because I was scared that she was in a coma. I didn't know what to do. And I didn't smack her hard. I mean, it wasn't like crazy. It wasn't WWE stuff or anything, but I'm trying to get her attention. And all of a sudden, and it's all dark, there's no light in the whole room. And all of a sudden I heard, "Papa, what do you want?" kind of thing. And it was like, there's no sense. I cannot even begin to tell you the amount of relief that was for me. And so when Michael spoke and he kind of, all drunk and stupefied, starts talking, I was like, "Oh man, dude, I'm glad you're still here, buddy." Like you're,
right.
it was so relatable though.
Yeah, I'll bet. And we had talked a little bit before about seeing this movie so differently. I mean, I consider myself a hyper empath, but it doesn't really matter. I can't relate to it on the level that you can. As a matter of fact, and the when I had warned you about what it's about, I had also mentioned, but just so you know, it's not a movie about suffering. There's no bedside suffering here. But because that is my experience. I mean, I've had family members die from cancer, but I was younger, and that suffering was kind of hidden from me. That was something that my parents had to go through, where I knew what was happening, but I wasn't bedside, with like grandmas and grandpas and stuff. I never had anybody close to me really, truly going through that. So I guess when I was, saying, "Don't worry, this, it doesn't have that bedside suffering in it," that's coming from a person who, that's the picture I have in my head, that struggle. Because so when the scenes that made you cry, I would have never been able to say, but there is this scene where, because I can't relate. I don't
Right.
I don't know what was going to hit you on a very personal level.
All of it. I mean,
Yeah.
I could go on. Well, it's amazing. And that's why, I mean, this is serious props to the writers. I mean, I can't even begin to tell you, and to the actors, because even down to little things like the hatred for small talk. And
Mhm.
when you go through something like that, man, you start to kind of hate small talk. The idea of people coming up and saying, and they don't mean it badly, but they'll say things like, "Well, how are you doing today?" Because that's so customary. And you have to internalize this, and be gentle with people, to say, man, this person's not meaning to be a douche clown. Right?
Yeah.
You got to be cool.
I have a perfect example of being on the end of offering that small talk because I don't know what to say. 5 weeks ago, well, at the end of last year, my dad had some issues where he had to go to the hospital, and his esophagus is messed up, and he ended up having to have all the surgery and stuff, and he almost died, and he spent quite a bit of time in the hospital. And then 5 weeks ago, he had been out for a while, for 3 or 4 months, and he started having some issues again. Said he wasn't feeling well. So my brother lives near my dad. My brother went over there and took him to the hospital. My dad, while he was there and they're trying to figure out what's going on, my dad starts puking up blood, like a lot of blood, and it's everywhere. And they come to find out he's internally bleeding, and they can't find it, and they can't stop it, and they're trying to do it. They can't reach it. They can't. There's so much clotting going on in him anyway that they can't find where it's coming from. So they transfer him to another hospital, and then eventually another hospital. So, which he wasn't aware of, because at a certain point he went to a comatose state, and he was on a ventilator for like 2.5 weeks. They don't want you on a ventilator for more than 2 weeks. There's he ended up having multiple strokes, major strokes, while he was out. They made it very clear there's 0 chance for recovery, and he can't breathe on his own and everything. And my dad has always made it very clear that he doesn't want to live like that. So you pull the plug. I don't want to be in a nursing home. My dad's been very independent his whole life, and so that was the decision that we had to make, was to pull the plug. And on the morning that was to be done, his eyes were open, and he was moving a little bit, like his arms. And this is actually a really short version, because of 5 weeks of this, of he's doing better today, his levels are looking good, and then the next day it's like, well, he had a stroke, and then it's like, well, he's had multiple strokes, and then something looks good. So it's just this head game. So that morning when he was supposed to be unplugged, and to see him like that all of a sudden, it was the strangest feeling of like not being really happy about it, because ultimately we all, my sister and brother and I, all felt like this is making this go on longer. This is going to end, because he doesn't want to be in a hooked up to machines, and here was kind of our chance to end his suffering. And now we're going to have days of him being okay, and then running more tests, and then ultimately he's just going to die. So it's hard to celebrate the fact that we didn't have to do that, and we weren't sure. I can't even explain to you. Yeah, it was just like it was a feeling of relief, but also a strange feeling of anger, because of the roller coaster that we had been on, thinking that today is the day that we're going to see relief, but ultimately still praying for a miracle.
Right.
Well, anyway, he walked out of there like 2 days ago, and he's at home now. But and we were told that would just not happen. But the reason why I brought that up is because the last time I talked to him, before he was in this comatose state for 2.5, 3 weeks, I said, "Hey, Dad, how you doing?"
Right.
And he's like, I'm, and this is, I think this may have been right before he started puking up blood and things got really serious. And he sounded like crap. He could barely talk. He's like, "I feel like crap." And I just said, "Well, I'm really, really sorry that you're there again. I felt horrible that he was there again." But just the idea that I would call and say,
how are you doing? It's so customary. It is. And that is actually the worst part, for me in my own personal experience, right, is
Mhm.
simply wanting that pain to go away and seeing it and hating it so much. And that's something that's a difference about A Monster Calls and this. And I'm sorry for bringing up so much about A Monster Calls,
No,
but they
that's fine.
are similar in theme. And there was in Monster Calls that played a part in that the hardship of having to watch that. And in this wasn't there, because in this it was euthanasia.
Mhm.
The struggle was quick. And
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it was entirely painless. The scene, and I won't describe it. I think people need to see it. And
Mhm.
I don't want to describe it in any way other than to say that it was remarkable again in the realism
Yeah.
of how certain things happen at the end of a life,
Mhm.
and how someone lives through this. But even with the idea of wishing somebody well when they're going through such terrible things, and that plays a role in this film where Andy, and I should just stop saying, I mean, I know it's toward the end of the show. I'm just going to say Romano's character, Andy, but Andy, okay.
Mhm.
Andy, he says things like, um, uh, never give up. That was actually my daughter's motto: never give up, keep on smiling. Okay.
Mhm.
That was her motto. For them, he insisted, never give up. And he brought up the idea of miracles. And this is something a lot of people did too, about miracles. And he said, miracles happen. And he brought up Jim Abbott. And I don't know if people remember this guy, man, but Jim Abbott played for University of Michigan, one-handed baseball player. He'd put his glove on the nub on his other hand, and he would pitch, and then he'd toss that glove to his dominant hand, grab it in case the ball came at him, and he had to catch it with that hand. I mean,
Wow.
the guy was amazing through a no-hitter. Okay. In the
Wow.
film, they talk about a no-hitter from the Yankees. He played ball from he played in college. He played for University of Michigan. And so, that's where we're from, Michigan. It's kind of a cool thing. And so he's a Wolverine. And I have his baseball card. I may even have a baseball card of him where he was playing for Michigan back in the day. But he brings this up, about, well, you can live that way. And the thing about that, though, there's two things, man, is one, cancer doesn't really give a crap who you are, like what religion you are, what your belief system is. Like people deal with it from all across the spectrum, and miracles are few and far between. But then he says something else too, and this is so cool. He's throughout the whole movie, there's this idea, and it's kind of a charming thing, but he says that he's got the best coach speech that's ever been done.
Yeah.
Right. Which is hilarious. I mean, it's so random if you think about it, like, hey man, I've got this speech for coaches, like for football coaches or basketball
Yeah.
coaches or whatever. And it's the best one that's ever been written. He says it's the best, right? So it's not even just like, okay, it is the best one. And the coaches would pay money for it. And so it goes in, and I don't want to say too much about it other than this, is that it was really cool, because to me, it is kind of the arc of the whole film in a way. Is what he says when he talks about, he says, picture something. We're going to lose this game, but so what? It's all going to be okay. You're going to have great lives, but you got to think one day. And he goes and he talks about these great lives, by the way. And he says, he's pretending that there are people like Johnny, he's like, and you, Johnny, you're going to go to a local college, and one day you might own a boat. And another one, he said, you could make $80,000. It wasn't like, that they're going to make $1 million, or they're going to,
Realistic,
yeah, it's realistic. I mean, yeah. And but he was saying, you're going to live great lives. And he says, but you got to think one day that you're going to wish that you could come back and you could replay that second half of the game that you lost. And he says, well, guess what? You're there right now. And I thought, yes, that's the film.
Mm-hmm.
That's the film for all of us, in my opinion. Is like every single one of us will breathe a last breath one day, and we will all leave in our wake people who will be hurt at our absence. And we have to think not only as the ones who will die, but the ones who are surrounded by people that we love and that we hate, that those people too shall die. And that we ought to think for ourselves and think one day we'll be at that place, the deathbed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if we are thinking in our mind and saying, not only that we're happy with who's around us and where we found ourselves in the end, but if that we had to go back and go to that midpoint, you know, in any of these situations that we found ourselves in at any point in our lives with our friendships and even with our enemies, and we found ourselves back in that place, that we would say, you know what, we gave it everything we had in such a way that there's no regret, that we're there. When we were there in the moment, we played the best we could. And if we went back, we wouldn't do it any different, no matter how hard it is, no matter how painful it is. And I thought, what a powerful statement. But it's also a statement of resigning to the thing that says, I have to keep going, and I've got to do my best to deal with what I deal with in my life right now in such a way that I'll be proud of this, because honestly, I'm going to lose. And so will you, the viewer. And that was so powerful to me.
That's good, man. That's a good note to end on. What overall, what kind of rating are you gonna give this? I mean, we've talked so much about it. I think I understand your overall feelings, but as far as like a star rating.
I remember when I first watched it, I told you that I couldn't quite give it a 5 out of 5. And I said the reason why was because of the ending. And I won't tell people what that ending is.
The ending,
because of course there's the ending of, that there's medicine, there's euthanasia, and I'm glad we didn't even go into a lot of detail about exactly how that all played out and stuff. More about what led up to it. But I give this bugger a 5 straight up, all the way. 5. People need to watch it, but it's like the Passion of the Christ, man. You don't want to get a pizza party for this thing, like, hey, everybody, we got waffle cones and the Passion of the Christ today. Like, hey, hey, man, watch that with your family or something, or your church. With this is really something that is something people should kind of experience alone, or with small groups, or with their loved ones, or whatever. That this is not a party movie.
A disclaimer too. This episode has been a really heavy episode, and it's because of the movie. And we're not going to be digging, looking for the, saddest thing that we can find or anything. Right. But it's such an important film that, and it's not something that, even though there are laugh out loud moments, like I said earlier, you kind of forget about them after a while. But, don't be afraid to tune in and think that all of a sudden you're going to be just, oh, man, that was too heavy. I'm not looking. We've got a lot of movies that we're going to, and I can't think of another movie right offhand that we're that interested in, that in viewing and reviewing and discussing, that takes on quite the tone that this movie does. So, I gave Wild at Heart 5 stars, and this is an easy 5 stars for me. And I don't normally do that, give like things like 5 stars. So I don't want it to sound like, I just hand them out and I'm always going to be, it just happens to be the beginning of our podcast journey. These were a couple ones that I personally picked out because they were 5 stars. For me. And that's why, and because I thought that they would make for good discussion. So
I can assure people that you are not Larry King, right? You're not like the pushover of movie criticism where it's just like every single movie's like, that's 5 stars. But I'm glad we picked this. I'm glad because, this is definitely a heavier episode, but we just got done talking about Wild at Heart. And if people knew what we have up our sleeve for the upcoming episodes, it wouldn't even be a thing. But I think it also goes to show not only that it's an amazing movie, and you have to deal with a movie of this magnitude. It would be a disservice to the movie not to talk about it. And that it's inevitably going to bring up stuff like this, stuff that's personal. And even the conversations you're hearing from this, that's probably the kind of conversations that you might have with your friends and loved ones if you watch this film. It's going to make you think about that kind of stuff because it is so real and it's so compelling, the whole thing. And it's so brilliantly put together and done. But I'm really glad. That's the last thing I'll say about it. I'm just really glad that you wanted to do this particular movie at the beginning. It wouldn't have been a good first one. Wild at Heart is a brilliant first move, right? Brilliant first impression for the show. Say, hey, This is what we do. It's what we talk about, because you can mix it up with the artistry and the esoteric stuff and everything else, the psychological dynamic and artistic quality of it all, even the music and everything, controversy. And that's great. And you're going to, that's in tons of movies. But this, I think it helps to round out the way that the show is, and that people who watch this, what they can kind of expect. Not that they can expect this. We're promising, in fact, that you're not going to have a lot of Paddletons, because there's just not a lot of Paddletons.
Yeah.
There's just not. I'm glad that we did this, and I'm glad that I watched it. I'm glad that I cried, and I'm glad that I got to talk to you about it. And so I'm really glad to have done this episode, this particular movie.
Awesome, man. Well, here's where we usually have some kind of comedic moral, but I don't know, under the circumstances of this film, I think it's hard to poke fun at something we might have learned.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything. I don't think there's any hope for that, man. Some movies, you just simply can't do it. It's kind of like Schindler's List. I mean, what are you going to do with that? What kind of funny joke are you going to tell about Schindler's List?
Right. So that being said, reach out to us. We got an email, PaleoCheeze with a Z at gmail.com. That's PaleoCheeze at gmail.com. We've got all of the appropriate social media stuff, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube channel, Facebook page.
Facebook. Yeah, man.
Just PaleoCheeze. Start typing it in. It'll come up. Yeah, reach out to us and even give suggestions and maybe get turned on to something new that we've never heard before.
Chad will start listening to rap.
Oh, God.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to have to watch like one of those movies, man, about like, rap battles. Yeah. We're going to be inundated with emails about this, or like the dance movies where they're having dance battles with each other.
Yeah. Electric Boogaloo.
Yeah. And so definitely make sure to email us, make sure to like, subscribe, follow, comment, and share. Make sure to tell your family about it and all your friends, all that stuff. And we'll see you next time on another episode of PaleoCheeze.
I love you, buddy.
I love you too, man.